and welcome to the Media Architecture Biennale 2023 online program day 2. My name's Dave Colangelo. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Professional Communication at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I have a special guest co-host with me today, Dr. Patricio Davila. He is an associate professor in the School of Cinema and Media Arts at York University. But he's also an executive committee member for the Biennale. But that's not all. We've also been collaborating together through our studio, Public Visualization Studio, for, we just realized, the last 13 years. So welcome, Patricio.
Thanks so much. This is very exciting.
And actually next week, as part of the in-person program, we're going to be checking out one of the works that our studio produced. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, we recently completed an installer project under a major thoroughfare here in Toronto called, the space is called the Bentway. It's a Bentway Conservancy. And our installation is called Atmospheres. And it's a project that measures microclimates in that area and visualizes them on large screen in a public accessible installation, and has sound work around it, as well as wind sculptures that really visualize what the environment is doing. So I'm hoping for those of you that are here in Toronto or have a chance to go visit it.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a microsite online as well. So
That's right.
if you go on the Bentway website, you can check that out.
That's right.
And if you were at the first symposium yesterday, the Nature Data Narrative Symposium, you would have heard the executive co-director of the Bentway, Elina Altman, talk about the Bentway, the space, and the project as well a little bit. So hopefully you're seeing some connections between those, and you get to see that in person next week. Okay, so I'm very excited for that, but as well, I'm really excited for our program today. So let's get started with our first paper session. It's moderated by our paper chairs who've put in a ton of work to get us to this point today. Well, a couple of our paper chairs, there's more of them. The first is Elise Hodson, and the second is Marius Hoggenmueller. Elise and I go way back, having worked together at George Brown College. She was the chair of the School of Design there, and now she is a senior tutor at the Royal College of Art, where she studies and teaches design culture and practice. And Marius is lecturer in design at the University of Sydney, and his work focuses on interaction design and digital technologies in the city. So welcome, Marius and Elise, and we're going to hand it over to you and check in with you a few minutes before the next session in an hour's time.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Patricio. Thank you for having us. We should also say the two other paper chairs are Glenda Caldwell and Joel Fredericks, and I think that they are perhaps en route to Toronto right now. So they're not with us, but Marius and I are very happy to host this session. So Marius is going to run the pre-recorded videos, and as he sets those up, I'll just introduce our speakers. So we're very lucky that all 4 speakers could join us, or all 4 papers could join us today from very different parts of the world. So first up, we're going to have Ville Paananen from the University of Oulu in Finland. And then we're going to have Thomas Schielke from Urco in Germany. Then Niusha Namaghi from Portland State University in the States. And then Luc Hespanhol from the University of Sydney in Australia. And so what we're going to do is run all the videos in a row. And then at the end, we have a question prepared for the speakers. And we hope maybe they've thought of some questions for each other. And we hope that the audience has questions too. So as we go, feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. So Marius, are you ready to go?
Hello, everybody. My name is Ville Paananen. I'm doctoral researcher at the University of Oulu, and I'm happy to present our paper, See the Place with Different Eyes, Fostering Empathy by Communicating Spatial Experience, here at the Media Architecture Biennale 2023. The paper was written by me and my co-authors, Elina Kuosmanen, Sanna Lehtinen, and Simo Hosio, who is also my supervisor. Human co-presence has been growing a lot in the past decades as a research topic. So how humans share spaces, how humans affect others in shared situations, that has been approached both in theoretical considerations, theoretical texts, but also in more applied approaches, as often seen in media architecture. to highlight few works on the theoretical side, there's been interest in the interactive aspects, the proxemic aspects, and also how the atmosphere as a complex networked topic can help to describe how we share spaces, how we affect our others' experience of space. But then in the design world, there's literature on how, for example, in HEI, there's something missing. There's missing empathy, shared understanding of momentary experience, shared evaluation, and a sense of place, as described by David Kirsch. And these modern technologies that we use are often quite limited in how they consider our shared human connection. But also in architecture, this interpersonal connection is relevant and has been gaining popularity and interest over the decades. The empathic design trend suggests that we can use empathy as a tool to understand users in more depth. For example, Helena Sandman suggests in her thesis how empathy can be used as a register, and in a similar way as singers use their voice in different registers. So empathy can be used as a tool in order to understand users in a better way. So this research comes at these two different themes. And on one hand, these empathy-driven design processes are more popular than ever. But then again, we have limited empirical knowledge on how we share these spaces. And while the theoretical foundation exists, there's more work that needs to be done to bringing into applied contexts. So in this study, we ask how can experience of space be mediated socially to elicit empathy. In our study design, we have two separate phases. In the first phase, we conducted an in situ field study with a custom Android mobile application. The participants visited different locations and answered questionnaires about their experiences. We also had domain expert interviews where we interviewed architects and urban designers on how they use spatial experience and empathy in their design process. So how they talk about spatial experience, how they understand their users, and how the users experiences different places. So our study started with the user stage, where the users answered a background questionnaire on the mobile application we developed, and then visited 4 places around the city and answered questionnaires on different topics. After which, a week later, they visited those same places again and answered questions, and then saw a few more things, which I will show you in a bit. Finally, with the participants, we conducted follow-up interviews to understand more in depth how they felt about their experiences using the applications and seeing other people experience those same places. In the final stage, we also had those domain expert interviews, as mentioned. The mobile application used a quite typical layout for an application, and for example, the map view allowed the participants to see where they are and where the different questionnaires are and where they should be answering those questionnaires in. Questionnaire on the first visit contained questions about their familiarity with the place, their aesthetic preference or aesthetic experience of the place, and what contributes to that, and also how safe they find the place and what contributes to that. And finally, the participants could take a photo in order to highlight what is important to them in that place. These are the 4 locations around the city center of Oulu, quite famous, quite typical spaces in Oulu that people either go through or spend time in. In the second visit, we asked about the participants' experiences of those places again. After answering to a questionnaire, the participants could see how the other people responded to those questionnaires the previous week. From this information, the participants could review what kind of aspects were relevant for other people. And finally, after seeing how the other people experience those locations, we asked how did their experience change? What happened? What did you pay attention into? Here's a collection of few photos and responses from the different locations. People paid attention into a variety of things. Through reflexive thematic analysis, we constructed 3 themes out of the participant interviews. First, we describe how spaces are first and foremost understood from the first point of view. A person comes into a situation or a place and they use their own embodied sense to make sense of the situation that they're in. Then we learned about how sharing those experiences of spaces affected the participants. How learning about, for example, safety that someone feels in a given place can affect your own understanding of your safety. For instance, one participant reflected on why their experience of safety, if their experience of safety was unfounded in that place, if they are feeling more unsafe than they should. And this reflective component was very interesting to see in our participants. And finally, the design, maintenance, and care towards a place affects how it's perceived. This is quite natural, but we found out how different people paid attention in these different aspects based on their history and personal interests. And finally, we conducted 3 domain expert interviews with architects and urban designers to understand how they use empathy in their work, how they communicate spatial experience, and finally, how our findings relate to their understanding of design work and spatial experience. We constructed 3 themes using thematic analysis to describe how designers use experience of space with their users and so on. Through these findings, we bring up 2 main points for designing for spatial empathy. That is, for designing, for supporting, empathizing someone's experience of space. So first, using multimedia in a wide way helps people to express their own sensory interests and what is relevant for them. Then maintaining the context of the original means that people saw others' experience in a different light when they knew what was their background. Knowing that someone was a male or female, for example, was relevant in understanding how they experience safety in a city. So in that sense, humans need to be sufficiently personal in those systems in order to support this empathetic process. Thank you for listening to our talk on the paper See the Place with Different Eyes, Fostering Empathy by Communicating Spatial Experience. Feel free to reach out to me and have a nice rest of the Media Architecture Biennale. Thank you very much.
Welcome to my talk, Cities Light Up in Solidarity with Ukraine, from internationally synchronized illuminations to projection activism, drone shows, and global art projects. Let's take a look at the first illumination. This was on February 23rd in 2022 in Berlin and Paris. But what happened before and what happened afterwards? First, we have to look back to the year 2014, when the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation happened, with a rather small reaction by the international countries in our world. Then in the year 2021, we noted that there is Russia building up a military presence near its border with Ukraine. Then, as mentioned on February 23rd, we find the first illumination for Ukraine in Berlin and Paris. The day after, the Russian invasion of Ukraine started. And as a response to the illumination in Berlin and Paris, we could see on the following day and the days after, throughout Europe, illumination in yellow and blue with on the country and cities like Paris, Rome, Brussels, Budapest, and Helsinki. And at the end of this week, then, when the Russian invasion started, we could see international anti-war protests on Sunday there. And thereby we see that the international press documented the response and solidarity signs with illumination first, and then the actual anti-war protest. But what was the story behind the illumination in Berlin and Paris? We can look to Berlin, where Franziska Giffey, the mayor of Berlin, reached out to the sister city, Paris, where we have the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo. They both decided they would like to send out a signal together using the Ukrainian flag and linking this to iconic buildings in the city. For Berlin, it was the Brandenburg Gate, and for Paris, it was the City Hall. Due to the fact that the Brandenburg Gate seemed to look more iconic and characteristic, we could see that the international press opened their stories more with the Brandenburg Gate than with the Paris City Hall illumination. The Brandenburg Gate has a special situation because their guidelines existed when to illuminate the landmark and when not. So they agreed on 5 criteria. So in case of a terror event, it was possible to illuminate the Brandenburg Gate. Or if there's an event in Berlin's sister cities, or an event in cities where Berlin has a special relationship. But in this case for Ukraine, the 4th aspect was used for the first time. Outstanding events of historical, political, and global significance with direct relevance to Berlin. The 5th aspect would be the Light Festival in Berlin. When we see the illumination in Berlin, we can regard this as some kind of protest and civil resistance tactics. When we look back to the history of Berlin and the Brandenburg Gate, we remember probably the time of the peaceful revolution with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Jean Sharp analyzed different methods for nonviolent actions, and he found that there are about almost 200 different methods how you can work on nonviolent actions and on civil resistance tactics. And he listed, for example, the display of flags and symbolic colors. And with the illumination of the Brandenburg Gate, for example, we can link this to the category of a symbolic public act when it comes to civil resistance tactics. There are different forms possible when we think about illumination. It could be a constructive intervention, like we have it when the public authorities, the city of Berlin, illuminated the Brandenburg Gate, or we can even find confrontational approaches, like when activists at the Russian embassy projected the Ukrainian flag on the embassy. And in this case, the security people of the embassy tried to erase the Ukrainian flag with their white floodlight. So it's a cat and a mouse game there. And this is really more the confrontational approach, and it reached also a wide audience in social media. When we look now at this kind of protest form and the intervention, we can regard this as a sign of political solidarity. And Sally Scholz defined 3 characteristic aspects for political solidarity, where we can discuss the power and the limitations of these symbolic gestures. The first characteristic is forming a unity for an identifiable group. In case of the Ukraine illumination, or we see the unity of the various cities and countries who did this together. The second characteristic is that political solidarity mediates between a community and the individual. So we have public authorities, cultural institutions, and we have activists, and a specific person is doing something on behalf of the group, and there's an interaction between the community and the individual. The third characteristic is very important, and this is creating a collective responsibility. In case of the Ukraine illumination, we could see that several cities accepted refugees from Ukraine as a signal to say, we will support you. But then it could be kind of difficult when one of these three elements are missing. And very often this happens with the collective responsibility. In those cases, Sally Scholz speaks about parasitical solidarity. It could happen that a feeling of solidarity emerges for the people who are doing something, but it actually does not really provide help to the respective group, like the Ukrainians, for example. So this is something where we see the limitation when not all the three characteristics work together as a powerful sign for solidarity. When we look from the visual point of view to the interventions, the colors with blue and yellow are quite clear, and we see it, for example, as a projection or floodlighting or in a drone show. And this was very important to send a very clear message, and which has been used before to get many interventions run very quickly. In contrast, we have also very successful signs of political protest, which are innovative, for example, like the holograms for freedom in Madrid in 2015. But here, with the Ukrainian illumination, it was a clear signal than being very innovative. Let's take a look now at the communication. And this is quite interesting when we look, for instance, on the national and local level. Take, for example, South Africa, which abstained from the UN resolution demanding the full withdrawal of Russian forces in March 2022. But on a local level, we could see that the city of Cape Town illuminated their city hall in blue and yellow, and thereby sending a clear signal that their solidarity with the Ukrainians stand from South Africa, and here especially from Cape Town. When we take all the illuminations together from Cape Town, Riyadh, Sydney, Berlin, San Francisco, Santiago de Chile, we see that the solidarity for Ukraine is really unique in size and the speed from the day on when the invasion started. And it created a lot of response on social media. But at the same time, we have to be a little bit careful when we consider the aspect of social media. And we can talk maybe even about selectivism. So it's very easy just to click on the Instagram channel and say, I like this intervention, the illumination, this was wonderful. But is this truly something where you show solidarity, or is it very easy signal which you're sending while you're sitting on your couch in your living room and not physically joining a protest intervention or doing something to support the Ukrainian people? However, we see that the community of all the people doing this created something like a shield for the Ukrainians. So the illumination can be regarded as a sign of hope and as a signal not to overlook Ukraine. And like Patrick Wintour, the diplomatic editor of The Guardian, summarized it, the attention of the world serves as a shield. But this is not only valid when we speak about public landmarks. There are also very interesting interventions when we look at private buildings. For instance, take the Allianz Arena, a sport arena in Munich, where the normal color would be red for the FC Bayern Munich team. And they abstained for a very special moment and said, we would like not to showcase our corporate colors, but we would like to express solidarity with Ukraine. And then you see the blue and yellow illumination, which was used, of course, also as part of corporate social responsibility from the football club. If you would like to know more about the context, what happened before as with illuminations and how are other political impacts influencing the decision-making and the development of the illuminations, please feel free to take a closer look at my paper, Cities Light Up in Solidarity with Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicholas Silver, and I'll be presenting on behalf of the rest of the authors for our paper Ombra Musici 2, Classical Music Performance in Public Space. Here you can just see a little image of our installation. Ombra Musici 2 was a musical project as well as a research project. The musical component included a projection of a choreographed violin performance on a terrace in downtown Portland, Oregon. The research project included contextual observation of audience engagement with our installation, and we also conducted semi-structured interviews with participants after their engagement was finished. Our research speaks to the mab23's conference themes of disengagement, specifically on that user experience and behaviors aspect within the context of the urban city. It also speaks to the theme of media architecture as shaping commercial, civic, and creative projects, with our project very much so being within the creative aspect with regards to public engagement. The goals of the project were to engage attendees at the Portland Winterlight Festival with a digital installation projecting the image and sound of a violinist in performance. And then that second goal was the research project, where we wanted to understand how people would engage with the installation, how they may feel about classical music, and then the experiences that those combine to give of the public space. The following questions guided our research. How do outdoor digital installations of classical music performance impact people's feelings about classical music? And then that second question is getting more towards how did the installation impact people's feelings with regard to the personal or social meanings that they attribute to the space or the environment. The theoretical framework and existing literature that we were situating ourselves from included Krajina's emphasis on studying street situations. Encounters with screens or digital media are situations which always have a potential to create friction within movement. So we were sort of interested in seeing if we can find that friction within movement through introducing our projection. Music also has potential to create people-space connections. That Gemci and Farah article speaks to how street music in Turkey has a potential for creating spontaneously built connections between people and space. Placemaking was also a really big and important concept to us. The Project for Public Spaces says that placemaking inspires people to collectively reimagine and reinvent public spaces. Du Bois et al. Also argues that placemaking has a number of individual benefits, those being benefits to personal feelings, thoughts, and perceptions of the environment, and that we think that these individual benefits can weave together to create a greater social meaning to a given environment. So there are many different iterations of placemaking. I invite you to see our full paper for a discussion of different kinds of placemaking, like digital and mobile. But creative placemaking speaks to the use of arts, cultural, and creative thinking to enhance the interest of a place by using digital technologies and narrative. So with our installation, we were using classical music, and we were also using the affordances, the digital affordances from the projection we were using. We were also interested in the concept of spatial montage and how media architecture can have synergistic effects and benefits with its relationship to the existing surroundings. This can grant narrative and associative benefits through moving images, architecture, and people. We are also interested in composite dispositif from Verhoeff, describing a state of mediation where environments of spectatorship overlap and co-constitute a relational experience. So how do these different areas or ways that people are spectators, as through walking through the city while being on their phone or encountering screens within the cityscape, how do these present a unitary viewing experience? This was something we were interested in. For our methods, we use contextual observation and semi-structured interviews. You don't have to read all this, but just know that from our contextual observation, we were extrapolating insights based off the behavior of people. So we were looking at duration of engagement, or how long they were within the plaza, things like gestures, and interactions between people, the installation, and the space. The semi-structured interviews were done after an individual or group exited the plaza or were finished interacting with the installation. This was both to generate further insights directly from participants and from people engaging with the installation, but also to compare it with the extrapolations we made from contextual observation. These are just a few examples of the scripted questions we were using, being what made you stop or what brought you here. But then we would also ask unscripted questions based off of how the interview is going. So sometimes maybe a participant would signal that they felt surprised that there was this installation playing classical music in the plaza, and we would inquire into that and maybe would ask if they had any existing familiarity with the plaza. So moving on to our findings. Group size we found to be really important. We observed that groups of 2 or more consistently engage with the installation for a longer duration when compared to the engagement of an individual person. It was also sort of interesting. We noticed that people who walk their dogs seem to also stay longer than individuals. We thought maybe they were more comfortable making frequent stops and just standing around because of their patient and obedient companion. On capturing, it was also extremely common that people would take out their mobile phones and take pictures or videos. And though we didn't explicitly have like something to engage with through mobile phones like some placemaking projects do, we found that the spectacle of the situation invited this behavior. People see something interesting or surprising and they want to take a picture or a video of it and show it to their friends or people they know. This is just an image where you can see the person second furthest from the left is taking a video, and there's also an interesting thing going on where without the existing architecture to sort of be an audience, people were sort of making do with what was going on here. Moving on to sound first, we found that from interviews, people were really drawn to the sound. The sound could even be heard multiple blocks away, so it served as like a curiosity, point of interest and curiosity to bring people to the installation. We even found that some people diverted their paths. They were walking in the opposite direction, but then changed their path when they heard the music to come and investigate. On spatial montage and dispositif, there was an interesting visual effect that was happening as interviews were revealing to us that because of the landscape of the plaza, they found that there was an interesting framing of the installation, both within that sort of the clock towers was positioned interestingly. There are these wide glass panes, and then there's also an aural effect where the plaza is surrounded by these tall, hard surfaces that was creating a reverberating effect that people seemed to enjoy, and this was beneficial to their experience. This gave a common and a shared experience. One group said that everyone feels connected. On turning space into place, we found that from our interviews, people felt that the plaza felt utilitarian and functional. It was supposed to be a place to go through for travel, or maybe to go to one of the buildings that were in the plaza. But through our installation, we found from our interviews that this was augmenting the perception of the physical and also the social space that went something beyond the normal understanding of the plaza. One person said, "I don't usually think of it as a place to be." And sort of building off of these findings, you'll notice that there is surprise in this, and this was something we were tracking as well, that there were discrepancies between their expectations of the space and their actual experience of it. We interviewed many people who were locals to the area, and they had a certain expectation of what the space was like, but this was ultimately upended by the installation. And this was seen as a positive experience as well. And just some last thoughts, we believe there is potential in using classical music installations within urban spaces for placemaking projects, but this doesn't have to be just classical music. You might consider other genres as well. Digital media offers numerous benefits in oral and visual affordances, and these can work cooperatively with the existing environments, and these are beneficial with people and their understanding of the space and the place. And also creating a spectacle seemed to be something that was really good for driving engagement. So media architecture that is something that is sort of interesting and that people want to take a picture of can really be benefited by the prevalence of mobile smartphones. And these are the references of the works I've cited. And I'm just going to play a short clip so you can get a better sense of what the space sounded like and how people were engaging with it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luca Espanyol. I'm a senior lecturer in design at the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney in Australia. I'll be talking about my paper, Design and Media Architecture for Digital Placemaking on Campus, Motivation, Implementation, and Preliminary Insights. This project evolved from a series of consultations conducted by the University of Sydney between 2013 and 2016 as part of its Campus Improvement Program, which included studies by firms such as Gale and Arup, among others. Among other things, their consultants conducted observations on activities around the area and counted the pedestrian and vehicle traffic across various gateways to campus. Based on that, they made several recommendations. As one of the outcomes, the notion of a cultural precinct around the northern end of the campus has emerged to encompass various existing and future cultural-related venues. The main objectives of the project were, first, exhibiting works from students, so this notion of learning on display, and then the notion of research on display, the exhibiting works research from staff, exhibiting works research from people or groups external to the University of Sydney, and also to forge collaborations with external community groups. I was approached to be part of the project due to my previous research and design work around media architecture and digital placemaking, which included various light and sound-based interventions into the built environment, most of them later published in academic venues. The idea was then to design digital urban interfaces for this particular spot in the precinct, next to a pedestrian footbridge, which serves as one of the busiest gateways to campus, which was, however, largely regarded as neglected and often unsafe. From a research perspective, our main questions were, first, how to design a digital augmentation of the built environment as a set of platforms to facilitate future creation of digital content by students and staff. And second, what would be the challenges involved in managing such a digital augmentation, both in terms of running the digital platforms and coordinating a program of activities open to the local community. After months of discussions with various stakeholders and community members across the university, as well as external curator and a landscape designer, we came up with 4 key design requirements. The first one is that the digital interfaces we would design needed to blend into the heritage architecture of the site. Second, they needed to provide sufficient lighting to the space, which was poorly illuminated at night and perceived as unsafe. Third, the digital interfaces should allow different forms of space utilization throughout the day, not only in the evenings, and they should also support the showcase of research and teaching outcomes from the university's community. Following that, we embarked in rounds and rounds of ideation and lo-fi prototyping, including various concepts, which were later discarded, like those you can see on your screen now. Eventually, we settled on 3 interfaces, which I'm going to talk about next. The first interface is what we call the dash wall, which is a fully programmable, low-resolution LED media facade. The facade is scheduled to switch on, play content, and then switch off automatically on a daily basis. Here are some images of the space activations using the dash wall over the years. The system is controlled using a software written processing, a bespoke software written by us, talking to the LEDs via DMX protocol. It can also be managed remotely with the use of a remote console system called AnyDesk. The second interface consists in outdoor projections, also programmed to switch off and on at specific times. The actual projector is installed on the building opposite to the dash wall, and digital content can then be projected on the brick wall when the LEDs are off. So the whole system, or both systems, should I say, are programmed so that one interface turns on when the other switches off and vice versa, unless there is an intention to run both at the same time. The third interface is purely audio-based and consists of outdoor speakers embedded on a timber stage. The speakers are controlled by a Mac computer, and like for the other 2 interfaces, the administration can be performed remotely via AnyDesk, so it can be done from anywhere in the world. The interfaces can also be interacted with through the use of the OSC network protocol, which allows a wide range of different implementations for direct interaction with those media platforms, making them, therefore, interfaces. So the space was soft launched in 2018, and since then was activated through various student and staff activities. Here you can see a student concept allowing people to sit in a couch and visualize their heartbeats on the wall, thus blending dimensions public and private. That was done through a pulse sensor connected to an Arduino board, connected to a computer running processing, talking to via OSC to the system controlling the LEDs, and therefore we had that real-time interaction between users in the space and the media wall. Another group of students has turned the wall into an interactive public game, as you can see here. So it was a collective, interactive, gamified, playful experience in public space, open to anyone passing by. There was a master research student, Peggy Liu, who has investigated the potential for hybrid media facades by studying the combination of high resolution, the projections, and low resolutions, the LEDs, to create a single animation. This study was turned into a paper and presented in the last edition of the MAB in 2021. We also had exhibitions of audio-visual art performances in this space. And we have also ran a regular digital animation session every night for about 30 minutes with the LEDs being turned on for that, turn it off for that purpose while the projections were turned on. By 2019, the precinct was also used for community events like this. We had a DJ animating the area while stories of local students and staff were projected onto the wall. So there was a digital storytelling and community bonding event in the space facilitated by the digital platforms. And it has been a long time since we started to transform this space in 2017. That's how it used to look like. This is how it looked like in 2019. And by 2019, it had become widely used on a daily basis by the university community. Yet, it's still a very young space, and digital placemaking takes time and is subject to unforeseen circumstances. Between 2020 and 2022, during the COVID-19 lockdowns and their immediate aftermath, activities at the Footbridge Gallery completely ceased, with great impact to the efforts previously made. It has also reviewed shortcomings and challenges in the way that we approach the project, and we're running it up to them. We identified 4 key challenges, which included 1, lack of integration between the 3 interfaces, technical integration; 2, the inability to perform remote administration of the physical hardware. So it would switch off, for example, or get broken for whatever reason, and we wouldn't know until very late. Reliance on a single staff for various key roles. I have been the main designer, developer, curator, and manager of the space for the past few years, which put a lot of stress on a single person to be able to perform all those roles simultaneously on top of everything else. And the lack of awareness across the university and beyond, which was, of course, made worse by the pandemic. Possible solutions we have been discussed include the orchestrations of the 3 systems to an admin platform, the installation of on-site cameras, and a process to ensure regular inspection of the hardware and software, and the establishment of a steering committee that will be cross-disciplinary and include community representatives. Earlier this year, in February, we relaunched the Footbridge Gallery with a light work and DJ set to mark World Pride Sydney 2023. We have also launched a social media account for this space, and we look forward to implement the findings from this research so far and continue to refine this digital placemaking solution for years to come. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Espanyol. I'm a senior lecturer.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to invite.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for the video presentations. And luckily we have all the speakers here now. Elise and I were intrigued by the aspect of empathy in the first paper. So we are jumping back to the first paper presentation, and we are wondering, like, because this aspect is a key role in like all of the papers in a way, and we would just like to ask, maybe Ville, we start with you because you are our expert now. How can your exploration of empathy being applied for media architecture projects, and also for the other speakers, Thomas, Luke, Niusha? How do you see the role of empathy in media architecture? How can media architecture foster empathy?
Right. So thank you very much for the question. It's a tricky one. On one hand, you need to have the personal connection whenever you are sort of trying to maintain empathy or to foster empathy. So media architecture installations, for example, looking at the Ukraine support, that's on perhaps suggesting empathy towards a like larger crowd of people. But on the other hand, empathy is usually seen as an interpersonal connection. So it is a very tricky thing, and we just yesterday actually we got a paper accepted on what kind of media formats support this kind of empathy, and we found that personal stories were more impactful than photos for empathizing accessibility issues in the urban environments. So maybe this can be a question how to use text and stories in a literal form in media architecture from now on. But yeah, it's a tricky topic, and empathy is a very much growing topic and a necessary topic in the modern design environment in the world at large.
Thank you, Ville, and maybe we jump to Thomas, to you.
Yes, so I think the whole action really started with empathy, that there was one person, a mayor, saying, I do something about this. And it was not maybe something from a government said you have to do something. It was initiative by one lady, and then speaking to her colleague to make it clear it's not a European idea and a European empathy response. So bringing this on a more national or international level, even. And I think the architecture is the canvas to send out a signal to the world. And it was a very iconic moment, I would say, with the visual language, which is easy to understand, and with all the responses on social media, you could see it really had an impact and brought all those countries together and say, yes, we stand with Ukraine, adding to all those social media buttons which you had with the flags, for example. So it's part of a larger communication for solidarity for Ukraine.
Thank you. Luke, you were designing a media facade in your project. And Niusha, you were also involved in the design of a media architecture project. What role did empathy play in the design process, and also understanding the user in this specific places?
Okay, maybe if I can start myself. I guess for what we were doing in the University of Sydney, the aspect of empathy was more like in terms of community creation or community bonding. So having student works displayed on campus, on the campus's buildings, on the actual physical architecture was one way to signify that they could take over the actual campus. They could actually extend their learning towards the physical structure of the university, and therefore there was open, right? There was this idea of opening up the campus, of tearing down the barriers and making more porous. Communicating that was really important, and also to communicate that not every work that's displayed needs to be polished to be displayed in public. They can be pretty much prototypes, and
it is this aspect of continuous making and continuous intervention in the public space that was I mean, common to all students, right? That you are progressing as you do, and you're progressing by making. So I guess that's how we took empathy in our interventions. Like there was not necessarily like a statement of the university. So comparing to, for example, the work presented by Thomas, where the physical architecture becomes almost like an official statement of the city. And that presents really interesting questions about the different scales of the audience, and also the reach of media architecture, and therefore how that affects the content back. But we can go into that discussion as well. But the empathy was less about an official statement of by the university or the owner of the space, and more from the community bottom up. How could we create a sense of making in public?
Thank you, Luke. And I'm not sure if there are already questions from the audience, but I have a follow-up question to you directly to your project. And you also mentioned that there was a study, an analysis from a university going on before you started the project, like a place analysis, how the place could be improved. Was there also an analysis after you launched the project? And in terms of the measurements, I guess it was like counting, initially it was like counting people in the place and so on. And is this like the only measurement to, like, is this the only way to measure success in media architecture, or how would you, what's your take on this?
Great question. Yes, we were starting to conduct like a follow-up study, counting presence on campus at different parts of the day, and especially whether at night that would change as a consequence of the media deployment when COVID interrupted everything. So we haven't had the chance really to, and then of course after that it made no sense, because the entire social dynamics on campus got disrupted. So we may resume that in a later stage. It's something that of course it is of interest from the university and from us as curating the space, because that can also dictate the future directions and potential expansion or not of that space. Yeah, there was I think there are other metrics, participation and interest and just awareness in general, which we are trying to build now with an extension to social media. I feel that engagement more and more goes beyond the physical space where the media architecture is deployed, and it's also about the stories that get created online, and how the works persist over time and create again this conversation that is hybrid in a way. So that's the direction that we're trying to go now, and which I think would also speak why for the potential success of the intervention, also in terms of placemaking, and because the content has been primarily created for the people on campus and by people on campus, but the whole idea from the beginning was to open the campus up to external communities and artists as well. So we haven't been very successful on that. The pandemic didn't help, so we're trying to rebuild that particular aspect of the project now.
Great, thanks, Luke. And we are jumping to Niusha now. What's the what do you think is the role of empathy in your project? You can also talk a bit about the project itself, and also I think the aspect of how was the project successful? You also mentioned that you analyzed like movement of people and so on. And I think also it was really interesting to see in your work that sound played a big role here, which is maybe not as common in media architecture. Yeah.
So for empathy part, I think using the classical music and engage with the emotion of the people in the plaza really helps us to engage their notice, and having them to stand and kind of watch and glaze and glance at the media. The project was it was really interesting. I can say the first one that really got affected by was myself. I didn't want to leave the plaza myself. I wish it never finished. But yeah, it was really successful. And after we tried to even engage more with the people with having interviews, like getting the answers that they gave us was really, it was really helpful, which mostly they were all saying why we don't have this more. Like the sound was the first thing that they attracted them. And then they stand and really admire the screen as well. So yeah, they were like, we want to have these more in the plaza, which is, yeah, really, we were thinking if we can do that more, it would be great.
We have a few minutes left, and I wonder if the speakers have questions for each other. Oh, there's
Yes,
David.
Niusha, I would be interested if you have done any other experiments with pop music or world music or other genres in the past, or do you plan anything in the future? It would be quite interesting to see what the relation is to classical music.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, we only did it for classical music. There was another part of it in 2019 as well, which unfortunately I was not a part of it. But both of them were only focused on classical music, which I love to. I know it's a very difficult process of getting the grant and having other professors to volunteer, but Thomas, very talented, and he really like into it, and just we made it happen, and we're really like glad that it happened.
Thanks, Niusha. I'm so glad you included some video at the end of your presentation, because after the paper, Marius and I were dying to see what it looked like, and it's truly beautiful. Dave and Patricio, I think we're kind of at the end here. Is there anything else? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we'll just say thank you so much to the panelists and for coming in person. Lovely to see you all, and thank you for your papers. And thanks, Marius.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you to Elise, Marius, and all of the presenters. That was great. I had a lot to think about there. You know, to continue the conversations, we have our gather space, which I mean, you can head there right now. We also have a break in the program in about an hour, where it would be nice for all of us to jump on there for a bit, where we can ask some follow-up questions, and people from the audience can meet some of the presenters. Patricio, any thoughts from that session?
Fascinating. All the papers were really fascinating. One thing that struck me as a through line through everything was the feeling, how these public displays, media facades, projections, the visual environment can really impact a person's feeling, like the person moving through that space, whether it be through safety, through and also through seeing what is possible. I'm reminded of this notion of, if something is repeated often enough, it becomes almost like the reality. Right now, we're living through these times where the queer community is under attack. And so signs of solidarity. Pride Month is here in Toronto. And so that kind of visuality is so important to create a sense of feeling, either safety, allyship, being seen, and being acknowledged. So all these papers really resonated with that kind of thing. So I love that.
Great. Yeah. I'd echo those comments. I got that definitely from the papers. I also got a real sense of people, of the kind of nuance of media architecture now, like all of the different scales at which it operates, all of the different media ecologies in which it's embedded, all of the different socio-political, bureaucratic layers that are in place that need to be considered when designing these things. And I also just love the sort of iterative mindset of all the presenters. And that really is kind of one of the great things about having this event. We've done all the, we did a ton of work before this. This is sort of a dense transfer point where we shove it all into one hour, but then off we go again, right? And we're inspired and influenced by all the things we hear at the event and the connections that we make. So yeah, I think it's really sort of hopeful to hear how considered and how nuanced the work is becoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.